a bunch of I try not to jump around too much. So in a nutshell, we have been engaged to conduct two separate services for the town of Amherst. Firstly, we will conduct the audit associated with the overall consolidated financial statements, and that's for the period ended March 31st, 2021. And in doing so, we will follow a set of guidelines which are referred to as public sector accounting principles. So the work will follow the guidelines as laid out within PSAB, we call it for short. And this is unchanged from any other year, so a consistent basis of accounting. And in conducting that audit, under that set of rules of PSAB, we establish and determine a level of materiality that will be sufficient to ensure that we will not end up with what otherwise could be some material misstatement within that set of consolidated financial statements. And the basis for determining the materiality is different for different types of entities, but in this particular not-for-profit municipal environment, very often the method that is used to determine that materiality is based upon the total revenues. So we take into consideration every entity that will be within that consolidated set of statements, and we look at the revenues associated, and we use a 2% factor. And so what that results in for us is a level of materiality in this current year, which is quite similar to past years. And that, of course, would be because the overall revenue levels are not consistent, or not different in large degree to prior years. So that 2% factor, when applied to total revenues in the current year on a combined basis with the water and the rest of the funds put together on the operating side, we end up with about $360,000. So in the past, it's been $350,000. Now, I mentioned that we're doing two engagements. And so the second engagement is, in fact, to be able to give an opinion on the through the audit process on the non-consolidated financial statements. And the non-consolidated financial statements contain solely the operations of the water utility. And so I mentioned PSAB is the set of rules that are utilized in putting together the consolidated financial statements and conducting the audit. And on the water utility, in fact, it is a different set of rules. It's a more specific set of rules, as we take guidance from the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. So many of the concepts are very similar. It's just that due to the specifics of the water utility, there are a few differences. And both of these sets of rules are well aligned with what otherwise we would refer to as GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. Now, materiality that is being used in our work on the water utility engagement is significantly different than that on the overall consolidated set of statements, of course, because in that operation, we're looking at revenues that are significantly less. And so a 2% factor in that side of things results in a materiality level of about 44,000. So that's what we will use in determining whether, in fact, there may be need for adjustment should we come across an item that requires adjustment. So we'll be using that as our measuring stick. So that cumulatively, if we had more than one item that we felt needed discussion and adjustment, we wouldn't want to exceed that materiality level. Now, Also included in the package in the current year is a planning letter. And there are two separate planning letters, one for both of these engagements. And the purpose of this is just to tell you about our materiality levels, tell you how we have planned out or will be continuing through the process in the audit. And it also gives us an opportunity to see the anticipated timeline. So within that planning document, I've noted today's date as the kickoff planning meeting. And I've noted the beginning of next week as a formal commencement of the engagement. And then from there, pretty much a month of auditing time. And as we then near the end of August, I've indicated that we'll be in a place that we'll be able to speak again and bring forth the results of the audit and have an audit findings letter. And then just because of the uncertainty of schedules, et cetera, from there, I've indicated that hopefully everything should be wrapped up somewhere in the vicinity of September 10th. So I've put together these timelines, looking back to past experience and how quickly things can come together. And Sarah has been so kind as to share pretty much the majority of all the information at this point. So following today's get together and discussion of engagement letters and planning letters, we'll be ready to move onwards in the engagements. So I think that wraps up pretty much what you have there in your package. I don't know if there are any questions that you may have. Questions from the group, maybe around some of the proposed timings or otherwise.
I know that the council members are comfortable with the raise hand aspect of Zoom. I don't know, do Jeff and Rob, are you okay with that? Or do you want to just jump in if you have a question?
I'll just jump in if I have a question, but I'm good.
Okay. Jeff, you're all right with raising your hand, or jump in with a question if you have one?
Yeah, I'm okay to raise my hand.
All right.
I don't have
Perfect.
questions at the moment.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So I see Councillor Baker has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. How many years have you done the audit for Amherst for the town? I'm back on council new. Have you been here other years?
Sure. Me personally, playing a lead in such an engagement, I would say in 2015, that was a year that I had joined into the audit team, not necessarily in the lead role at that point in time. And it was most likely probably 2016 and or 17, at which point I would be considered to be in charge of the audit.
All right. And
sorry.
No, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so prior to that time, the firm of Jorgensen Bickerton most definitely had acted as auditor for the organization for a number of years as well. I'd have to actually go do some research to figure out how many years that might be.
No, there's been around a lot of years, but the main question is the years in the past when you go to get the material, get ready to set up. How do you find stuff like in place? Everything is available for you. Staff is excellent and all that stuff. That's stuff you need.
You're asking me how my opinion on that?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that the town of Amherst is incredibly fortunate to have Sarah in the position that she is in, and having had that responsibility for any number of years to gather and present and share the information. Definitely a plus.
The reason I asked that question, I've heard this many times when I was on council before. It's nice to hear that we still have the great staff in place to have this stuff ready for you at the time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Any other questions for Mark Milner? All right, you have more to present to us, Mark?
No, I would say that for today's get together, that it's just you having this information here and available is all that needs to be covered at this time.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much. Well, that
Okay.
takes us then to our fourth quarter report. And for that, I'll turn the floor over to our CFO, Mike Hunter.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mark, for your presentation as well. So I'd just like to go through the fourth quarter financial report that's included in your agenda. The first page just gives you an overview of the reports. We're reporting on fourth quarter results. These are preliminary prior to being audited, so they could be adjusted during the audit. But this will give you an overview and an expectation of the format coming up toward the audit. So we can go to the next page. So it has the schedule of operations for the general fund. You'll see there in the contents as well. And then schedule of operations for the general operating fund and the water operating fund, and then capitals toward the back. This page that you see is our corporate structure. So it's unchanged from prior reports that you've seen. So it outlines all the different departments that we have and who reports to who. Okay, if we could go to the next one, this is a graphical representation of our revenues compared to budget. So in the blue, you'll see our actuals for each department, and the green is the budget. So you'll see taxes were higher than, actual was higher than budget. Grants in lieu of taxes was a little bit higher than budget. The services provided to local governments is equal to budget or close. Sale of services is just slightly below budget. Other revenue from owned sources are slightly below budget. Unconditional transfers is close to the same as budget. Conditional transfers was higher than budget, and other transfers was significantly lower than budget. You probably find that's due to COVID. And then down below, you'll see the same sort of representation for expenditures. So if we scroll down just a little bit there. So corporate services was under budget for expenditures. Police department was under budget. Fire department under budget. Operations was under. Recreation facilities was under. Community well-being was under. And it's hard to tell with some of the other ones because the expenses are small enough on the graph. It's hard to see there, but you'll see the economic development was slightly under budget. Planning and development looks even on there. And then strategic, environmental stewardship, sewage was under budget. Solid waste was a little bit over budget there, according to the graph. Community support area rate was under budget, and mandatory provincial contribution area rate was slightly under budget. If we go to the next page, this is the schedule of operations for the general operating fund at March 31st, 2021. So you'll see it's got a comparative for actuals for the prior year, which is the year ending March 2020, compared to March 2021. And then you've got budget for 2021 and then the variance. So we can just scroll down a little bit more there, and then we'll go back up after. So the total surplus is projected to be 1.4 million. And then if we can go down a little bit more, there's a breakdown at the bottom of this page. It shows your surplus. The first column where it says surplus, that's your normalized surplus of 586,000, which is about 4% of revenue. And then we have 817,000 is directly attributed to COVID, and that represents about 5% of your surplus. So we can go back up a little bit. I'll just talk a little bit about the variances. So we start at the top. So the taxes was over by 150,000, and that's attributed to D-transfer tax being up. So we've had a lot of new housing sales during the year. So there's people moving into the area from outside, and that's reflected in the real estate market as well. So that increase was 150. We had 24,000 extra from services provided to other local governments. That was grants in lieu of taxes. That was from Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation for the LaPlante Street, where the LaPlante Street liquor store used to be. It wasn't included in budget last year because it was expected that building would be sold. So and they ended up paying that for the whole year because the building hasn't been sold yet. So we had a little bit extra revenue there. Sales services was under budget by $59,000. A lot of that was attributed to criminal record checks, program revenue, solar revenue being under, and then sewer metered revenue was over budget a little bit. Other revenue from owned sources was under budget because of fines, room rentals, concession rental, and investment income. And then conditional transfers was over budget by $127,000. So you'll see most of that was attributed to, well, there's a difference between a Safe Start grant that we got from the province of Nova Scotia for $205,000. And then there was a grant that was budgeted for that we didn't get for an energy grant of $75,000 and $5,000 in student grants that we didn't get during the year. So we were over budget. The net over budget on that was $127,000. And then down below, you'll see the minus 415. That was various transfers from the operating reserve not brought in, for example, for OEM, election, lights, that sort of stuff. Didn't need to be brought in because of COVID, and stuff was paid from operations. In the expenditure side, we had wages were under budget by $482,000. 282 of that relates to COVID savings. The rest was from vacancies from different positions. My position was vacant for a bit between the time Shelley left and when I was hired. The IT manager was vacant for 3 months. Dispatchers, QP seasonal. There was a counselor, I believe Jason Blanche was not on council for part of the year during 2021 fiscal year. So that would have been some savings there on that side as well. And then the rest was less overtime during the year, mainly because of COVID. Administrative costs, we had the election was under budget by $20,000, and that was because everything was done electronically this year. So there was some significant savings there. $12,000 in advertising, $144,000 was related to COVID. And then there was computer hardware and software licensing of $25,000, promotion $8,000, heat $30,000, electrical was $26,000, maintenance $33,000, repairs $26,000, plant maintenance $13,000, that sort of things. And that includes building and facility costs as well. Some of those numbers that I just mentioned, the $154. Vehicle and equipment costs were down $127. We had 29 over, sorry. Yeah, we were over budget on asphalt of $32,000, and an active community fund offset some of the grant for the program of $15,000. We're under our materials and supplies for the treatment plant of $14,000 and various other areas. Grants to organizations, there was $35,000 from a Fresh Start grant and $26,000 under on grants that weren't given out last year because programs weren't run. Other municipal costs, there was $500,000 under budget there. 306 of that was directly related to COVID. 120,000 was strategic for community center study that was put forward to this year, and it wasn't done last year, but it would have been included in the budget last year. 15,000 from tourism branding, and professional services of 44,000. Fiscal services was under by 60,237. A lot of this was made up of the 52,000 from loss on assessment appeals and housing and new debt. Tax exemptions was over 110,000. So that's 10,000, not 110,000. So we budgeted for 93 applications and received 116 during the fiscal year, March 31st, 2021. And then the bottom line cost recovery, we had grants of 37,000, transporting patients of 19,000, workers' compensation and short-term disability 19,000, and then insurance reimbursement of 4,000 there. So that outlines the differences in the budget versus actual. And on a normal year, that would have been 586,000 estimated. That's shown at the bottom versus the COVID year, which is an abnormal year for last year. So it actually had a very positive benefit financially for the town, which enables us to be able to fund some of the things that we've already started funding, like the youth center and Nova Scotia Community College. And there's a sewer debenture balloon payment that's coming up. Fire truck, we're able to fund some of that out of operations versus having to borrow for it, and also the Zamboni as well. And then housing, I know we talked about it in the operating budget before, but housing, there was always the risk there that sometimes their expenditures will be higher than what they gave us numbers for to budget with. So there's a little bit of reserve there available for that as well. If we go down to the next page, does anybody have any questions about that page?
I have one.
Okay.
Mike, you mentioned funding for youth center, and I was just curious how much was put towards youth center.
I believe it was in the range of 33,000 for 4 years, and that was to be given to Maggie's Place for the next 4 years to operate a youth center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Davidson has a question.
Mike, are you able to extrapolate what the actual increase in the deed transfer tax was for the last fiscal year? I can't seem to find it. It's the overall tax surplus is 150,738, but what would the deed transfer tax change be? Because that should have been fairly significant, I believe.
Yeah, it was, most of that was the deed transfer tax. Sarah, can you talk a little bit about that as well?
I can. The deed transfer tax is the full amount. It was 156,400 in total. That would be the general and the poverty portion together, the full amount. So where that line shows 150,000, there was a few items that were probably under budget that reduced that number down, but really all of that is related. It's a full 156,000.
156,000?
Yes.
Okay.
There's
and
160 something was the deed transfer tax, though, wasn't it, Sarah?
The deed transfer tax alone is 156,400. But the
Okay.
sheet you're looking at on the screen, it's included under the taxes grouping, and there's other rates and things in the taxes grouping. And so the variance there shows 150,000. So there would be a couple other items in that grouping that wouldn't have met their budget, which reduces the overall variance down to 150. But deed transfer tax alone is 156,000.
that's a surplus of 156,400.
That's correct.
What would, do you know off the top of your head, Sarah, the deed transfer tax budget for last year? That's okay if you don't have it. I'm just
Off the top of my head, I'm going to say it's 200,000, I believe.
Okay.
Actually, it might have been a little bit less because we reduced the poverty side down due to COVID in the budget side, so that we wouldn't inadvertently spend more. Just one sec, though, I can pull it up here. In 2
Thinking
seconds.
180, but
Last year, the budget was 230,569, and the actual came in at 386,933. So the budget breakdown was 200,000 in the general rate for deed transfer tax and 30,569 in the poverty grouping. And the poverty was normally 50,000, but we reduced the budget side down to 30, but it still came in well over at 77 for poverty.
okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jason McDonald, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify something with regard to what Mike said regarding the opportunities we have to pay things down, like the fire truck that we were going to borrow for that we bought last year, or the Zamboni that we're going to planned on borrowing for this year. Those will be council decisions that'll come back probably in late August or early September, where we'll come to council and look for an amendment to the capital budget. So council can actually decide if that's how they want us to utilize that money. It's likely we're going to recommend that, but I just wanted to let you know, in case there was any question, that is a council decision on how that would be done.
And if I may, one other consideration may be, while we see a surplus this year because of COVID, we probably have to be thinking ahead and seeing that there may be a reduction in our commercial tax base, because commercial tax assessments or property assessments for commercial may go down as a result of the harm that COVID did. So have to keep all that in mind, but that'll be for some future discussion.
Yep.
Yes, your worship, and I probably Mike or Sarah could explain this a little better, but a lot of our larger commercial tax accounts, the amount that they pay us is based on revenue. So possibly, the rumors are Polycello had a great year and Walmart had a great year, but maybe Ford and Chrysler didn't sell as many cars. Maybe they sold more. I don't know. But the issue is some would have been hit. Some would have been benefited. We have no idea what that balance is. So we have to be very cognizant of that we could have a hit next year.
It's very industry specific about the revenue. Each industry will have some benefited a lot and some suffered a lot during COVID. So, and as Jason said, we'll see that as the year progresses.
Okay, any other questions for Mike Hunter at this point? Nope. All right, well, carry on then.
All right. So the next page, if we scroll to the next page, this shows the schedule of operations for the general surplus. The general operating fund, sorry, and it's by department. So we'll see. It's similar to the prior page, except this page is broken down by department versus expense category. So you'll see that the corporate services actual revenues was $3,030,000 versus expenditures $2,662,000. So we had a surplus there of $368,000. That's made up mainly of the restart grant of $205,000. Wages and benefits of $78,000 in savings, and then admin costs of $91,000, the transfer tax of $109,000, plus investment income of $77,000. That's what makes up the $368 variance. And that's mostly due to COVID because of the restart grant. Police ended up with a surplus of $92,000. That's takes into account criminal record checks being under by 56, fines were down by 18 for the revenue side, and then on expense side, wages and benefits were down 60, admin costs were down 20, vehicle and equipment is 18, and then cost recovery from transporting patients was up by 35, and professional services of 19,000 to accumulate to 92. In the fire department, we had $61,000 surplus. That was mainly $41,000, and then building costs of $13,000, professional development of $18,000. Operations is $174,000 surplus. We had the wages and benefits of $102,000, COVID savings of $37,000, snow and streets was $50,000, and then we had admin costs of $12,000. Building facility costs of $18,000, vehicle equipment costs of $38,000, contracts and agreements of $23,000, cost recovery of $7,000. We were over in materials and supplies of $20,000, and asphalt $22,000 for salt. Recreation facilities, we were over, had a surplus of $228,000. $106,000 of that relates to wage savings in relation to COVID for seasonal and students mainly. Building and facility costs were under 75,000. That includes electrical, natural gas, and water and maintenance, and that would be directly attributed to the use of the rink as well. Vehicle and equipment costs were under 47,000. Operating equipment, 36,000. 30,000 is benches that were moved to capital. Materials and supplies, 22,000 for flowers, etc., that sort of stuff. It was offset by some reductions in revenue from concessions and ice rentals, that sort of thing, to make the 228,000. Community well-being ended up with a surplus of 124. A lot of that was 72 of that was made up of wages and benefits from COVID, along with students in the MPAL position. 25 from advertising and promotion, 25 from program instruction, 24 from tourism, branding and tour events, less the amounts that it was under on program fee revenue of 15,000 and specific event revenue for events that didn't take place during the year. Economic development was over 21.9. Half of that was made up of admin costs of 14,000. There's professional development, travel, conferences, and promotion that wouldn't have been held during the year because of COVID. 11,000 from building and facility costs, so heat, natural gas, maintenance and repair, and then 10,000 professional services less. And then on the revenue side, there would have been room rentals of about 13,000 that would have been lost during the year. Planning and development, we had a 15,000 surplus in that department. Admin costs were 11,000, which is made up of professional development, travel, conferences, and advertising, and then 3,000 in professional services. Sewage was ended up with a surplus of 156. The metered sewer was over 26,000. Then we had expense savings of 50,000 on wages and benefits. 34 of that related to COVID seasonal workers. The rest is on overtime and benefits. Admin costs were under 8,000 with respect to liability claims, and then professional development and travel, building facility, electrical was under 16,000, maintenance was 11, fuel was under 8, materials and supplies 4, and professional services, contracts and agreements was 20, and then there was some debt issuance delayed to the next fiscal year, which will be about 8,000. So that makes up the 156. Solid waste was 14,378 in a deficit position, and that was related to tipping fees were up by 15,000 during the year. So a lot of people home during the year resulting from COVID, did a lot of house cleaning and ended up increasing our tipping fees. Community support area rate was over budget by 132, and that's mostly directly related to COVID. So we had 121,000 in grants that weren't given out last year. Mandatory provincial area rate was over budget by 41,184, and that's mostly attributable to the housing. The difference in the budget number between their budget and actual was 34,000, and then we had corrections was 4,000 and assessment was 3,000. Does anybody have any questions about those? No?
Don't see any hands, so
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay. So the next page is the schedule of operations just for the water and operating fund, and you'll see the net variance, the surplus at the bottom is 4,801, and that's just a normal year. There's not a whole lot of variance there. You'll see the 12,000 was a little bit there for that, and then down below we had in the expenses, I guess the total variance on the revenues was 23,900, and then the plus, and then we had variance on the expenditures of 19, so the total was 4,801. Anybody have any questions about those ones?
Can I jump in for a second, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
It's there. In the water operating fund, The real kind of surplus at year end was 79,302. And what we've done is we've used an additional 74,500 for extra capital from revenue to fund water capital projects that were originally long-term debt as their financing source. That is something that we've suggested and will be coming forward to council in the form of a CDR in a future meeting. But so, you know, that leaves a surplus of 4,800, but the original amount was 79,302.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody have any other questions for that? No? Okay, so,
No hands, so
No.
please continue.
okay, so then the next section of the report is the comparison of actual cost to budget for the capital projects during the year. So you'll see the water capital. So what happened because of COVID, there you'll see anything that's highlighted in yellow got carried forward to the next fiscal year. So it's included in our 2022 capital budget. And because they weren't able to be done during the 2021 fiscal year because of COVID. So you'll see the top one, monitoring wells. There was a little bit of money spent on that, $1,400, and the total budget was 40. Albion to Queen was 433, 949. The budget was 433. Wellfield generator, that's being done this year, got carried over completely, so the budget for that was 240. New truck was budgeted for 40. We were able to purchase that for 37. And the next three projects, Spring Street design, Central Ave design, the land purchase, and Highway 366, those were all carried forward to 2022. And the well one pump and motor, that was an emergency purchase that was 33,000 for the pump that had gone down. So total budget for water capital was 529 for actual, and the budget was 753. Going down, we have in the operating budget, we have, under general capital budget, we have equipment. We budgeted 110 for equipment for an asphalt hot patcher and a new truck, and we were able to purchase those for 104. And then in buildings and land, we had budgeted 921. Actual was 404, so there was the yellow ones were carried forward. So the fire station, building repairs, security doors at the public works garage, council chamber upgrades, solar for community, but for the fire hall and police station, which those have now changed to the two different locations now, as we talked about at council. So those projects were all carried forward to 2022, so you don't see them there. And then everything else was pretty much in line with the budget. So the stadium solar was over a little bit. It was 271, and 259 had been budgeted. And then we were under on library heating, 93 versus 100. And the other ones, town hall server, police department server, those were budgeted at 23 each, and we were able to get them for 13 and 18. And the security gates at the public works garage, budgeted for 5. They ended up costing 8,400. Large multi-category projects include Albion Street, Croft to Queen, pulverize and pave. It was budgeted 250. We had spent 141.9 there. And then on the next page, the rest are streets. So we had budgeted 663. Actuals came in at 665. So you'll see most of them were in line with budget. You'll see as some of them were slightly over and some under. And then overall, we ended up very close to budget, within 2,000 there. Okay. Storm and sanitary sewer. Racetrack Road got carried, the pump station upgrades at Racetrack Road got carried over to next year. Wastewater treatment plant lift stations, that was budgeted for 125, came in at 127. Willow Street Trail east to Abbey. The new sanitary sewer main that got carried over to next year, except for 2,900. That was total budget for that was 50. And then Albion Street, replaced corrugated storm sewer, came in at 13,951, and we budgeted 10. Down below, we have sidewalks. So 2 sidewalks got carried over to next year, the Dickey Brook Trail from Donald to Charles and Willow Street Trail east to Abbey. Those got carried over to 2022. And the rest were all under budget except for the Upper Church Street, Robert Angus Drive to Town Boundary sidewalk was a little bit over there by 8,000. Okay. The next page is the fire department. So we had 4 different items there carried over to next year. And the new pumper to replace engine number 2 was purchased last year for $591. And it was very close to just under budget of 600. And then the replacement of the structural firefighting bunker gear. I think we saw some of those during our tour back in the fall, if I recall. 20,000 was budgeted, and those came in at 19,241. The police department patrol vehicle number 6 was carried over to next year, or 2022 fiscal year, the current year that we're in, and those have been ordered. So we've ordered that one and also the one for the following year that you approved in the capital budget already. Fiber communications between the police department and town hall came in at 17,694. It's budgeted 34,500. And we had a SKU vehicle of budget for 45, came in at 43. And then video systems for 2 of the police cars, the budget was 18 and it came in at 13,218. Recreation, total budget for that was 251 and total expenditures were 207. Consists of land purchases on the corner of Victoria and Havelock Street, self-watering hanging baskets. That came in under budget. Former tennis courts, resurfacing surface for multi-use recreation facility. Electric vehicle and the sprinkler system backflow preventer, they got carried over to next year. Christie Park footbridge, that was not done last year, and we've talked about that at a council meeting as well. So council decides that'll happen in the future. Decorative lighting came in at 27,200 versus 30,000 that was budgeted. Ice compressor motor repair, that was moved to the operating budget. Dugout protective fence, this is down at the Rob's ball field. So we had the dugout protective fences put up, and if you've been down there, you'll see all this. New batting cages there now. Installation of grass infields at all 3 fields, and then that's all at the Rob's Park. So you'll see all those if you go down there and see, and the kids have been using them. So they all came in under budget. And then the outdoor furniture and tables, those are all around town. So there's 31,000 there. So total general capital budget came in at 2.49 million, and sorry, the actual came in at 2.49 million, and the budget was 3.5 million in total. Does anybody have any questions about those?
Don't see any hands.
No? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Good.
And if anybody has any questions later or any concerns, certainly contact myself or Jason or Sarah. Yeah.
Absolutely. We will do that if we think of anything. Thank you very much for that fairly detailed presentation. And does anyone have anything to say? I guess we're at the end of our agenda. So I would, Councillor Baker?
I just have one comment. By the looks of the report we just got today, looks like the town of Amherst is financially in great shape. So I just want to thank you for the staff, for all departments, for the work they've done for the town of Amherst and for the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. If there's nothing further, I would seek a hand up to motion to adjourn our meeting. Councillor Landry, and seconding Councillor Christie. No objections. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, and please have a good evening. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you
Good night.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks to
Night.
Sarah and Mike for putting
Good
this
night.
together. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
All right.